Share this screen. See if we have. Take away these notes from last time. Okay. Which of these are still relevant? I have not done this WG grammar thing, which probably should do, but nor have I done this. That has an issue for it. This I think I did do. I think I did this too. Did you ever post a comment on the Allied array size RFC?
I probably have.
All right, we got some stuff here to bring in. So we'll all see this, right? So let's see. Reviewing any first step, I guess, we'll check for newly created RFCs. There are some, including this interesting one by Boats, which I hadn't seen until just now. I think this fits pretty well into the, this comes from Async Foundations, although I wasn't aware Boats was going to post the RFC. Probably worth looking at some point. Do we want to give feedback to this opt-in stable trait vtables? I'm going to ignore it for now, but this seems to fit along with the there was some work that I've been wanting to revisit from Simone about stabilizing the adding some way to work with wide pointers. Anyway, any thoughts on newly created RFCs? I'm just trying to make sure we all at least see them once in a while. We'll move on. Let's look at the project board. So active projects. Async Foundations. I filed a meeting proposal relating to the stream trait. So and I guess now there's also this async drop RFC. But we've been moving towards adding a trait for streams, for asynchronous streams. And I think there's a fair number of LangTeam interactions that come up in this proposal. So I'd like to talk about it in a meeting at some point. I kind of highlighted a few of them here. It mostly has to do with, well, I'll just go through it real fast. One thing is this generic problem that the way our method dispatch works right now, you can't move methods from helper traits into the standard library without potentially breaking people's traits. Because if you add a new method, then it's going to get ambiguity where it used to resolve. And that's kind of annoying. And that's relevant to stream because we wanted to add a kind of narrow definition of stream that doesn't have all the helper functions you might eventually want, because there are reasons that those aren't ready yet. But if you do that, and then you have the helper functions living in like a futures crate, you kind of have no clear path to eventually add them into the standard library. That's annoying.
One other item in which this interacts with Lang, and I'd like to understand if this is what you're mentioning, what's mentioned in the third bullet here. Is this going to be integratable into for loops along the lines of like this discussion about into stream instead of into iterator, so that you don't have to write while let sum equals in order to build a stream loop?
Yeah, so there are two potential future directions that are worth talking about in that way, syntactically. One would be integrating with for loops and whether we want that, which I think we probably do, although there's some dissent. And the other would be generator syntax to let you create streams.
Right. Which I would be
And,
very excited about.
yeah, that seems to be, I think the latter is the more important of those two, because like iterating over streams with helper functions is not so bad. But writing streams today is very difficult. And the other issue that's related is, I think first of all, I finally found a name for this pattern that I like, but we've been discussing the idea of, well, I'm gonna stop my video too, so I don't have any videos to look at. But we've been discussing the idea of like this version of stream, just like iterator, each item that the stream produces, you give ownership of it to the person who's getting the next item. So when you call next, you get ownership of the item that you requested. But there's a use for what was once called streaming iterators, but I'm now calling lending iterators and lending streams. The idea being that you call next and you get something that's borrowed from the iterator itself or from the stream itself, so that lets the streamer iterator reuse some internal buffer or something like that. So essentially you have to finish with it before you can call next again, because you're going to reuse the same resources. And that's an expected thing we're going to want. And there are some coherence issues that will arise if we add a lending stream in the future. Similarly, if we add a lending iterator, basically you would like to be able to automatically convert every owning stream into a lending stream, because it's sort of, it's compatible in this direction. Like if I'm giving you ownership, I can also lend it to you essentially. But the problem is, if you do that, you run into these coherence issues where you can implement lending stream for any type that implements stream, and you can implement lending stream for any box of another lending stream, let's say. But then that creates two routes. If you have a box of a normal stream, there are two ways for it to implement lending stream. You can either wrap the box of stream as a lending stream, or you can have it wrap the stream into a lending stream and then have a box of lending stream. If you see, there's like a commutativity diagram thing happening here. And
would it be possible to reverse that? You're saying like you can always get a lending stream from a stream. Could we reverse that and say that you can get a stream from a subset of lending streams? Or in other words, a stream is just a lending stream where the lifetime doesn't actually depend on the stream?
Yeah, maybe, yeah. Yeah, you could do that. You could write well, hold on, let me take a few notes of what we said, but syntactic issues, you could do what you're saying. I'll just take notes in here. So that's a sort of separate question, right? But so what I'm saying is there are coherence issues that arise if you have a impl for all L or for all S. I'll use syntax that doesn't exist, but maybe should. Impl lending stream for impl stream. No bother. Now I'm being inconsistent. So this is one problem, and I think it would be nice to solve this because it's not, these interconversion issues are not specific to this case, similar to the method compatibility issues. But what you're saying is somewhat different, and I think the answer is yes. You could imagine having something like, I think it would be something like implement stream for L, where L is lending stream. We don't actually know what the syntax would be for this, but it'd be something like that. And here what you're saying is kind of, if L is a lending stream whose item, no matter what lifetime you give it, is always I, some type I, then this can be made into a stream. And the fact that
That's another way of saying the lifetime of the item does not depend on the lifetime of the lending stream.
yes, that's what it's saying, because it kind of can't by construction, because due to the way that scoping works, right? Like the type I has to be something you could type out here where this lifetime is not in scope. So it can't possibly reference that lifetime.
Right, okay.
So yeah, you could have, and then the same issues will arise. So basically interconversion is going to be a pain because of coherence, and it would be nice to solve that. So anyway, I thought that'd be a nice thing for us to discuss, and I don't have specific ideas beyond the sort of obvious ones for how to solve those problems, but it seemed good to go over it. I still think we should add streams because they're useful, and these problems are more general than that, but it will probably heighten the pressure to solve those problems at some point. So I should really be just typing into this document. And I can paste it in. Okay, so moving on from that. This RFC, I think, is ready to land. I was talking to Locathor about it. Basically, I just have to make it do the work, make a tracking issue. And we'll probably make a project group. That was one question. I'll at least make a stream about it or something in Zulip and call it a project group. Why not? To track the progress, but I don't think there's any other updates on that. So tainted fallback. I'm working with someone. We spent some time. This is more of an implementation concern, but spent some time working with someone last weekend on Friday on how to solve this. So maybe we'll see some progress here. That would be nice. We'll see. One thing I wanted to bring up about, no, never mind. I'm curious whether along the way, if we find that there are solutions that don't involve changing the fallback, whether there's appetite for that. But at this moment, we're still exploring a solution that says we are going to change the fallback uniformly. Any update for Project Safe Transmute?
Gearing up to actually post an RFC based on the results of the previous discussion. There's been a lot of back and forth about, okay, what exactly goes into the RFC? So I'm expecting that that should get posted any week now.
Okay, inline assembly.
So inline assembly is in an interesting state. At this point, it has been implemented. And I mean, actually, I think the status rather is still accurate. It is implemented, and it just needs to continue being used until we decide to pitch stabilization.
Do we have some, should we like check in on it, I don't know, in the fall or something? Do we have like a time frame?
Roughly speaking, yeah. I think it would be good if we had a rough idea of how many releases we feel it needs to go through before we're ready to say, has there been any critical issue? And so I would really love to see this happen in the 2021 edition. I think it should definitely go at least like 3 or 4 releases before we even consider this. But people are actively using it. I see a lot of people who were using LOVM ASM converting their code bases over to use ASM. So I'm wondering, do we want to wait 3 or 4 releases? Do we want to wait until like November, December?
So 4 releases is 12, or 4 times 6, 24. weeks is 6 months. Am I
Right,
getting that?
okay. So 4 releases is probably about the right amount of time, isn't it?
Certainly not more, I don't think. I would say 2 or 3 is probably fine. I guess, yeah, 6 months. That means we probably want to
So
check.
check back in 1.48, consider stabilizing it in 1.49?
Is that right? That's probably right.
Well, actually, why don't we check back in 1.47 and then decide whether we want to stabilize it in 4.8 or 4.9?
Yeah, so I think we should be shooting for early next year.
Okay.
Just put it that way. I mean, that gives a good long time.
Yeah. Agreed.
I think we'll keep checking in, but unless there's any major updates, we won't.
Yeah, I think at this point we don't need to check in on a day-by-day basis and make notes. We can just, or week by week rather, we can just talk about it if something comes up.
Yep. Const evaluation. So I don't know that there's any updates from this group.
Oh, sorry, one more item on the previous thing. The final comment period has completed on RFC 2873, and someone needs to actually merge the RFC.
Okay, clicked on the wrong thing.
And since I was the liaison for it, I'm thinking somebody else should be the one to actually merge it.
Okay. I can do that, sure. Okay, let me put that on my to-do list. Merge Russ Lang RFCs number 2873. Okay. FFI and wine, we overlooked that. I think at this point we're basically just right.
There is a little bit of bike shedding going on in terms of naming, like C unwind versus C dash unwind versus it does not rise to the level that it's even worth talking about in this meeting. It's just literal bike shedding.
Yeah, that's right. There's some bike shedding. I don't really have a opinion about it. I encourage people to go and give their opinion if they have one. Otherwise, the RFC is basically right. So the RFC is in FCP. That's going to take a little while for that to close. Has just entered our FCP. I think the next stage is going to be implementation, and it looks like some people from Fastly might be into that, so that would be nice.
Yep.
Okay. In terms of const evaluation, so there's this meeting proposal, which is not const evaluation, but is related to const evaluation. I think Boats was talking about trying to go through and create a const generics stable subset that we can actually stabilize. I think this is a great idea. It looks like we could do it this week. It looks like people would be able to attend. Any thoughts? There's a I think
we talked about whether we should bump the checking for well-formedness conditions on type alias discussion to another week in order to discuss the const generics subset. I personally would be all for that. I think in terms of priorities, I just want to make sure that we still have the other meeting next week.
Yeah. I think we can do that. All right, let's do that. I will do the scheduling work.
But yeah, there have been discussions on Zulip for what this subset of const generics would allow, and it's already quite a few interesting things.
Yeah, there's a long thread I haven't caught up on. Okay,
right.
That sounds good. Okay. So the last thing is we have all these major change proposals, some of which are getting old and long in the tooth. We had talked about, I'm going to approach this week various people to see if there are people who want to serve as liaisons. Otherwise, I think I'm going to start sending warnings that we'll probably close some of them if we don't find a liaison, assuming nobody signs up. So if you have thoughts about potentially being a liaison for one of these things, you should leave a comment, especially even if it's like, I can't do this now, but I'd be interested in doing it in a little comment.
I was about to ask, should we have a process for establishing people who are willing to liaise but who do not currently have the bandwidth? Because there are, some of these I might be willing to be a liaison for, but until the existing project groups finish their way through, I feel like I shouldn't take on another one.
Yeah, I think the process would be just leave a GitHub comment.
Okay, I can do that.
We
had talked about like actually assigning ourselves to the RFC, but then I'd love to know a way of saying, how do we distinguish between willing and have time?
Yeah, I say just leave a comment for now with the details, and we'll figure the rest out. Okay. All right. Let's get to the rest. P-high issues. Nothing new here, no major updates that I know of. Nominated PRs. So I'll propose stabilizing pointer offset from, which lets you, I'm not exactly sure. Forget. I guess it lets you get the offset of one pointer from another, I think. Anyway, any thoughts on this stabilization? I think it's pending and waiting for checks.
I think the biggest open here, well, it's not waiting for very many more checks.
Right.
But I think the biggest open here was it changed over from something that would technically allow you to get the offset from one object to another and then would generate undefined behavior if you actually used that offset ever, to something that is specifically undefined behavior to even ask.
Yeah,
which
okay.
I think that seems fine. If you're taking two unrelated objects and asking for the offset between them, that seems questionable. The only case that I can think of where that would be relevant would be things like, I want to know which of these pointers is earlier, and that's just an argument that you should be able to ord on pointer raw address values. And I think you can do that already, so I don't think there's a problem.
Yeah, you can convert them to integers for one thing.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay. I don't think there's anything else then. So I'll remove the nomination. Is that just for us? So
considering it's both Lang's and Lang and non-Lang, then we might want to leave it nominated.
I don't think libs has a meeting.
Oh, okay then.
They don't have a nomination process. Okay. Probably worth seeing. Next one, allow weak dash pointer and friends for unsized t. So
Whoever's typing, beware that you're not muted.
yes, this is letting you do arc of din. I don't know what is this letting you do. Weak pointers with din types and things like that. I think we were tagged mostly because, or only because, there's an unstable function which this relies on in some way, or relies on at least on that same capability. Oops. And what it does in particular is it gets the alignment, given a raw pointer, it gets the alignment of the value that that pointer references. But if t is sized, then the pointer can be dangling, but otherwise it cannot because you have to read the metadata. And I guess that's something you couldn't implement without specialization. So they wanted to make us aware. So it would be like an intrinsic, I guess. Any thoughts? Otherwise, people can check their boxes as they see fit. Okay. Okie dokie. Nominated issues. Yes. This is actually good stuff. So someone has been doing some interesting work here. I raised this because this intersects possible addition. So this is the RFC that allows you to, let me find a good example. I guess allows you to write stuff like this, which will be a shorthand for reference for printing the value of A, which today would require this kind of more explicit notation. And the problem is, it turns out there's this corner case around panic, where if you do panic bang with a value, then no matter what that value is, it gets propagated up as the value that you panicked with. And that includes raw string literals that already contain braces. So there would be, there's kind of a conflict here. And so what is being proposed is that we can use an addition boundary to transition so that the behavior is uniform. And there are various details or possible ways we could do that. I guess the questions before us are kind of, do we want to do it at all? If so, which approach? I don't have the details in my head right now, but I think my opinion would be that we should do this form. However, it should still be possible to panic with some value and not a string that is created. Because I think that's something that's possible now, and it's possible only with libstd, I guess, because you need to allocate a box. It's not possible with libcore. But if it were possible, then you would need, I wouldn't want to take away the ability to like panic with some value that's not a string, basically, as the thing that you're throwing, so to speak.
I think there's actually two issues at hand here. There is the issue that panic has the ability to process an arbitrary thing that isn't a string. And yeah, that I believe involves boxing. There's also that panic has a special path for literal strings that is designed for the case where you can't or don't want to allocate memory and don't want to handle the full format machinery. and the macro is designed to say, oh, I have just a literal string and no arguments, so I should avoid running this through any of the format machinery. There was a proposal this week to add a mechanism to the arguments type for an as_str that would allow you to ask, is this a literal string, and can I just treat it as one? And it would be an as_str that returns option.
We'll start taking some notes
And
here.
option static stir. And so I believe that's being handled. And that then raises the question of, if you do a panic using a literal string where the literal string appears to contain a format, then will it break anything to treat that as an error rather than as a literal string that happens to contain curly braces?
Yeah.
So there's some discussion going on there, and I get the impression that in most cases, it should just be resolvable, and for the actual compatibility issue, it might require rolling an addition boundary. But either way, I think we should be able to resolve this.
Right. I think that's my impression. There's like no reason we can't resolve this as long as we're willing to wield an addition boundary and do some
Right.
addition. I think it would
But
be
in
a big
particular,
priority win to resolve it.
Yeah.
I mean, big in the sense of, keep it all in perspective, but it's an everyday annoyance that we can eliminate.
right. And I think the point of the discussion that I saw was that while it might take an addition boundary to move forward, the result would not be losing any functionality compared to the current system. So people could always use the new addition version and would have the ability to work with a static string and an arbitrary value and an arbitrary format, depending on the situation. There shouldn't be a problem.
Yeah. Where were you seeing the conversation? Was it on this tracking issue or somewhere else?
Some of it was here, and some of it was on the proposal to stabilize the arguments as_str. I will link that. Hang on.
Okay. So I think that I want to propose that, like, for the purposes of this meeting, we just post something saying we are in favor of making this transition. We would like to preserve the ability to panic with arbitrary values and literal strings in the process, although it is okay for it to require some specific syntax or like a different syntax maybe. I don't know, like, but we would like to sort of see a design for that. Does that sound right?
That sounds good. I kind of like the making it more obvious that you're intentionally doing the I don't want to allocate and I don't want all the format code.
Anyone disagree with what I have? Speaking of additions, or we should probably talk about this. So I don't know how many people saw it. I'm going to put it. I'll come back to it later, but there's a draft RFC that I've been working on with Steve. But before we get to that, does this sound okay? Any complaints about that? All right. I'll post that after the meeting. So about the RFC draft. So Steve Klabnik and I have been working on this RFC draft. It is designed to kind of answer various questions about how additions will work going forward. And what it specifically proposes is doing Rust additions, kind of, yeah, I'll just say what it is. I don't know whether it's somehow continuing with the current plan, but also changing what the previous edition RFC had said in some ways. Trying to do them on a regular 3-year cadence, but not trying to use additions as a sort of deadline or a way to tie together a bunch of higher priority projects. The idea is more that, like the train model, that these are the chance, we expect that every 3 years we will have done a lot of high priority work, and it will give us a chance to talk about what we have done. But whereas for Rust 2018, we kind of really pushed hard to get a bunch of stuff done by then, and that was highly stressful. We want to try to avoid reproducing that dynamic. But, you know, maybe it'll happen more naturally because there will be this sort of sense of here's the additions, and we can phase different kinds of work at different points through the cycle. But and we specifically said that we would make addition idiom lints change the way those worked. So Rust 2018 idiom lints were up. I don't remember exactly how they worked, but they were not errors in Rust 2018. What we would like to do is say that if you have an idiom lint, it's a warning for older editions and it becomes deny by default in the new edition. And like any migration, we introduced the term migrations for basically breaking changes that are specific to the new edition. So idiom lints are like other migrations in that you ought to have either they should have very low impact or you should have an automatic pathway for them because they're going to become denied by default. And we also said that we don't want to do fishing for reserving keywords or other syntax changes, that we should be doing that as part of some active project group or you know, RFC. Like if we have some proposal to make generators, then we can reserve the keywords that proposal is looking at, but we're not going to go reserve keywords, like a whole bunch of keywords that we think we might use, which is kind of what we said in the last edition. And is there any other changes? Some of the motivations here I thought was kind of interesting. I guess I was specifically comparing to like, to the way Ember does their additions, which is this feature-driven additions released when things are ready. So they basically introduce a bunch of, they set a high-level goal. They don't say when the edition is going to be released. So it's not like, they give it a name like Octane. And then when the work is done, the edition is declared. So it's like a big triumphant event that they've achieved this goal, which is a really cool idea. But it's a little bit different. And in particular, I think it doesn't fit with smaller changes so well. So I think things like this panic is a good example of kind of smaller changes that if you have a regularly paced edition, you can sort of say, okay, we're going to make this transition so that this corner case, you know, you can now just reference variables without having to add them as separate arguments. But there's a corner case where it will create some incompatibility, but we don't think it'll affect a lot of people, so we can slate it in for the next edition and manage it that way. You can't do that if you're tying a bunch of things to the edition. And so similarly, we want to make it basically that we're going to do the edition because we always expect to have some stuff to do, and not make it so that we like have to decide whether the edition is worthwhile based on what changes are there or not there. That's the proposal. I'm open to feedback if you don't agree with certain aspects of it, but it definitely affects the Lang team quite a bit. So it seems worth bringing up. I think we'll open this as an RFC soon. One thing I haven't added is I was trying to add things in an appendix here of possible changes. I know we had a list somewhere. I have to go find it. And I think one thing we also say in here is that we should create a sort of group who's dedicated to managing the edition. And so I think we'll want to think about what is the process for stuff like this panic bang change or whatever? How do they get? We have to have some master list of all the things we're tracking for the addition, and how do we get things into that list? It's going to be important. Any thoughts? Okay. Alrighty. Speaking of things, so.
Sorry, I apologize. I was on mute. On that RFC, one policy question that I would be curious about policy changes. You mentioned the change to the idiom lengths, that they would start becoming deny by default in the edition. So 2021 idiom lengths will become deny in the 2021 edition if you opt in. I'm wondering, do we need to have a certain time lag there such that we do not introduce an idiom lint, the release before a 2021 edition comes out, and then immediately when that edition comes out, if you're using that edition, it becomes a deny by default? Do we need a transition period, or is that fine because you have to opt into the edition?
I think
it's fine because you have to opt in.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So in theory, they might give you a nice long warning that something's coming, but even if they don't, they let you know what's the problem in your code before you transition?
Yeah, so you'd be getting the warning in the old edition, and ideally, if it would come with a migration, so when you make the transition to the new edition, it'll be fixed for you in any case. Although the only caveat is that an acceptable migration might be to just add a warn, like to just change the run level in your crate or at your function boundary or something.
Yeah.
So you can have very simplistic migrations, and then you do have to deal with it yourself if you care to remove those. But basically, it's the same as errors, right? So like it's the same as any other migration that you have to do. I don't see why it should be a problem. Also, my computer is going very crazy. Can you all hear me?
Only barely over the typing.
Try turning off the video and see if that helps. My computer is having some issues. Okay, it seems a little better now. Hopefully you can hear me. All right. This ampersand raw issue, I think I nominated this. Yeah, mostly because I want to move the raw ref macro for stabilization. Is there a reason not to do that? Anyone have any concerns about that? So we don't, there's no, I think Ralph at some point then said he would be willing to prepare a stabilization PR. There are also some examples here of people using it. I think we're ready to expose this capability. Okay. Okay. I'll remove the nomination. There's not really anything to say here. Cool. Nominated RFCs? None. RFC bot pending list. I think we already covered these two issues. Target feature 1.1. Oh, yeah. This we're just waiting on. I'm gonna ping these folks. And for calling methods, I don't remember what was going on with this. Anyone haven't been there for a long time? I think this is the thing where we're kind of, it's basically a project group style. Like we need some experimentation, and that's already happening anyway. That sound right? All right. Well, we got a few minutes left. Any final thoughts for the meeting? It's the end of the agenda. Going once, twice. All right. Thanks everybody for attending, and see you next time. Or see you on Wednesday.
Thanks, Nico.